All right. So today we're going to talk about heating our homes with biomass fuels. And if you don't know what that is, stay tuned because we're going to be talking a lot about it. And by the end of it, you'll absolutely know what it is. But first, I wanted to cover what we've gone over previously on pathways to energy efficiency. So as always, you can catch these episodes at any time on our Facebook page. We keep them up on the page that you can go in and review them at any time. So some of the things that we've talked about that you might be interested in, we've talked a little bit about do-it-yourself things you could do around your home. We've talked about net zero homes. And our topic for today is a really big one that contributes to a net zero home. So it kind of connects some of the pieces of our previous episodes there. We went over how to read our utility bill. We've talked about the building envelope, so insulation and air sealing in our homes and how it helps contribute to a nice airtight home and reducing our utility bills while increasing the comfort of our homes. And last week we went over electricity and different types of vampires in our home. So electricity vampires being electronics in our home that are drawing on our energy while we're not really aware of them doing it. And so we kind of talked about how there are different ways in which you can cut back on those and help you reduce your utility costs. Okay, and so as always, we are your community energy advisors. So my name is Catherine Ripstein, and if you live in Jefferson and Lewis counties, you can reach out to me with all of your energy questions and needs. If you live in Clinton, Essex, or Hamilton counties, please reach out to Jennifer Perry of the Adirondack North Country Association. And if you live in St. Lawrence or Franklin counties, please reach out to Nick Hamilton Honey of Cooperative Extension of St. Lawrence County. And we can all help you with all of the questions that you might have surrounding these episodes or getting an energy audit or anything else that you might want to know about as far as energy goes. All right, and so with that, I'm going to introduce a very special guest today. We have Guillermo Metz from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Tompkins County. And Guillermo is going to cover biomass renewable heating for us today. So welcome, Guillermo.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Thank you, Katie. Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to run through the beginning a little bit quickly, but the first sense I want to get of everybody is what is biomass? This is a picture of the Adirondacks, area that you're very familiar with, and it is entirely biomass. Something else to keep in mind is that most of this has been logged at one point in the last 100 or 150 years and is growing back at a rate of about 3 times as fast as we can harvest or we currently harvest it. So there's plenty of biomass. It's not just the Adirondacks and the well-forested areas either. It's pretty much we have forested areas across the state within 50 miles of any metropolitan area. So even New York City has vast forests within about 50 miles of it. So across the state, there's a lot of biomass. So what is biomass? It's essentially anything that was alive at one time and is now dead. So that's plants and animals. What we're talking about here is solid biofuels for heating. So not liquid biofuels like ethanol, things used like a gasoline substitute, but solid biofuels we're going to talk about just for heating. So that's wood. Specifically. So as you can see right behind me here today, it's a cold, rainy day, so I decided to get the wood stove going. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. You have your forest, goes down to logs. Those are logs cut down to cord wood in the bottom left, and then chips, which are more of an industrial use, and wood pellets on the bottom right. That we'll talk about what those are a little bit. Now, the first thing that everyone should think about, Katie talked about at the top a little bit, is really first energy efficiency before you consider any kind of heating system. Most of our homes all over the Northeast are old and or drafty, and so we have some issues we need to deal with, either new construction, old construction. All homes could use some weatherization typically. So get an energy audit, look back on those previous presentations that Katie and Nick did about tightening up your home, making it more energy efficient. And then start thinking about how you might heat it. So some advantages of cordwood is that it is relatively cheap, it's plentiful, it's local to every part of the New York State, which gives benefits to the local economy, has low embedded energy, so it doesn't really get transported very far. It can also be transported safely, and it can be stored indefinitely. So these are all really great things that a lot of other fuels don't have. And one of the big ones, again, is that a lot of the fossil fuel money leaves the state. So most of the money goes out of state when we get to talking about liquid fuels. Um, in comparison, virtually 100% of the um, money that's spent on wood heat stays within the community. So there are some issues with heating with wood, and primary among them, I would say, is the emissions. So if we're not burning cleanly or responsibly, we can get some high emissions, and that's air emissions factor, so air pollution, and also it's a concern for the creosote that builds up. So the top of this chimney pipe has a whole lot of black, and inside I can guarantee it also has a whole lot of that black, which is very combustible and contributes to chimney fires every year. So the things to think about, what you burn is really important. So again, we're talking mainly about wood and wood stoves at this point. But your wood stove is not an incinerator. So you can't really you shouldn't really just burn anything but clean, dry wood in it. It's actually illegal in New York State since about, I believe it's 2009 to burn anything that's considered trash. So any of these things are not allowed to be burned in a wood stove. And the reason is because it just has very high particulates that are very harmful if you burn any of this stuff. So really you would just want to burn seasoned, clean, dry wood. And what does that mean? Seasoned means it's got a moisture content of less than 20%. And that's going to take a while to get the wood dried down to that level. Sometimes a year, sometimes as much as 2 years for something like oak to really get off that moisture. And the reason that you want to get rid of all of or as much of the moisture as you can is that there's a lot of wasted energy to boil off that water. So that's a waste of your money that you spent on the wood. You're going to create a lot more particulate matter, which is basically smoke. And that's very harmful to your lungs, to your, not just respiratory, but your cardiovascular system. And then again, creosote builds up in the chimney pipe, and that can be a very serious fire hazard. So the next step is what you burn it in. So the equipment that you burn it in is really important. On the top left there, you have an outdoor wood boiler. Some of you might be familiar just driving around the countryside, seeing these really smoking horribly, especially now in the sort of shoulder months when they're asked to come on, kind of shut off, sort of smolder for a while, come on again, smolder for a while. They're heavy, heavy polluters and really should be considered replacing those. And we'll talk about some of the equipment that can safely and very efficiently replace those. In the top right, you've got a pellet stove with a little pellet bucket, and in the bottom, a wood stove. So pellet stoves, the beauty of them is they take the operator out of the equation. So you can't really burn garbage in a pellet stove. You can't burn wet pellets in a pellet stove. And so by design, they're much more clean burning than a wood stove or one of these outdoor wood boilers. They're very efficient and clean burning, and they have oxygen sensors and thermostats and things that really make them user-friendly. They're relatively affordable, and we'll talk about some of the rebates that are available through the state that make them extremely affordable. Most of them do require electricity, though some have battery backup. Many of the models these days do have battery backup, actually. You can get bulk delivery of pellets, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And one of the considerations is that pellets must be kept dry. And another one is really that these things take maintenance. They take weekly cleaning. It's not a lot, but if you don't do it, they don't work or they don't work well. So that's always been an issue with pellet stove owners, that if you don't do the minimum maintenance, they really don't work very well. But if you do the minimum maintenance, they work great. Now, if you're really wanting to burn wood because you have a local source or you make your own firewood from your land, there are wood-fired boilers that are much, much more efficient than your hydronic heaters or your outdoor wood boilers. So these are basically called two-stage gasification, advanced wood boilers sometimes. They're extremely efficient and clean burning because what they do is they heat up the wood in the top layer there in an oxygen-starved environment. They heat it up to maybe 400 degrees, and it loosens up all of the combustible gases in the wood. And those then flow down into that secondary chamber in the bottom, and that gets blasted full of air. You reach temperatures of upwards of 2000 degrees, which really just completely burns those combustible gases. So you get very, very clean burn. Very, very little goes up the chimney pipe. They are expensive, but compared to an outdoor wood boiler, they're comparable actually. These are the base prices, and then you start talking about distribution systems and all of that can get expensive. They come in various sizes, you know, from residential all the way up to commercial scale. They work best when they have secondary water storage. So basically you have a large tank of an insulated tank of water that you heat up. So this heats up that big tank just with one load of firewood. You let that fully burn down, and then you draw off that insulated tank of water rather than drawing off, asking this boiler to basically cycle on and off. And that's going to make it much more efficient because you can't really turn wood fire on or off very quickly. And that's why you have that high emissions and, you know, the smoldering. You really want to avoid that. Pellet boilers are a step up, I would say, from that. They give you the luxury of an automated fuel feed. And the beauty of that, I'll get into in a second with, you can get bulk delivery of pellets. But basically these burn wood or grass pellets. Some folks in New York State are starting to explore grass pellets. They have for several years. It's still a very niche market, but there are some other things you can pelletize besides wood. Residential scale, again, relatively comparable to an outdoor wood boiler. The size, again, can be scaled quite high, quite large systems. You may be familiar with the Wild Center up there in Tupper Lake. That has a 1.7 million BTU unit that heats the center and the domestic hot water. It works with a solar thermal system that preheats the water, and then the pellet boiler kicks on and heats up the water more if needed. So these can go to a very large commercial scale. Across the Northeast, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine have many, many more of these heating schools and commercial buildings than we have in New York, but they're starting to make some inroads here. Again, automatic feed systems. This is really where they shine, because you can get someone to deliver anywhere from, you know, a couple tons up to 20 or more tons of pellets at a time, and put it into a silo or some sort of a feed system. These are a few different examples, and there's one more I'll show you here. This is outside of a local home. These are compartmentalized, so they can be built up to basically any size and just get bigger and bigger. And somebody comes and delivers pellets to the home into this silo or this container, and then they get automatically fed or augured into the pellet feed system. So you don't really have to do anything. It's as if you were burning oil or propane. And then once a month or so, you have to empty the ash pan. And that's just about it. So there's very little maintenance, actually less with these than with the pellet stove. The pellet boilers are much more forgiving and operate on their own pretty easily. But with that automatic feed, then you don't have to be moving around the 40-pound bags of pellets or moving wood around. So it's much more like a fossil fuel system, but with a lot of the advantages of pellet heating. Incentives. We've got a lot of incentives in New York State that you should pay attention to. There's a lot on this slide, but I would point you to the website address at the bottom. The program is called Renewable Heat New York, and it's through NYSERDA. So if you just Google Renewable Heat New York, you'll find it easily. And you'll see the incentives there for both pellet stoves, pellet boilers, and also actually the third is the wood boilers that we talked about a little bit. So the idea was to get rid of old wood stoves, try to do a wood stove change-out program across New York State that only accepted pellet stoves as the replacement rather than wood stove to wood stove, just because, again, we want to take the operator out of the equation. really get clean burning equipment out in the communities. So NYSERDA is offering $1,500 towards the purchase of a pellet stove if you recycle an old wood stove. If you're income qualified at 80% of median area income or below, then there's a $2,000 rebate for those folks, and an additional $500 if you have an old wood stove to trade in. So if you're income qualified, you don't even need to have an old wood stove. You can just get this system if you're heating with oil or propane currently. And even I've seen sometimes they will do it for folks heating with natural gas. So you may want to explore it if you are. So if you think about it, if you have an old wood stove to trade in, $2,500 to get a pellet stove just about pays for the entire pellet stove and installation in many cases. So you may be able to get a free pellet stove through the program. If you're going up to the two-stage combustion wood boilers, the rebates are hefty again, $7,000. That can cover more than half the cost of the unit itself here, not the distribution system and all of that. But if it's tapping into a good hot water baseboard or something like that in your home, then you may be able to just switch one of these out for your existing boiler right now. So again, if you're income qualified, the incentives are much higher, up to $18,000. And if you're replacing a outdoor wood boiler, it's an additional $5,000. So these are really significant incentives. I would really recommend anyone with an outdoor wood boiler to look into this, either for a wood boiler, one of these advanced two-stage combustion wood boilers, or as we'll talk about again in a second, the two-stage combustion pellet boilers, similar technology, but using pellets. So with the pellet boilers, 45% of the total cost, up to $16,000. That's, again, very significant. 65% up to $23,000 if you're income qualified. And again, an additional $5,000 if you have an outdoor wood boiler or an indoor wood furnace, if you're recycling an older wood furnace, a whole house unit. So all of these incentives are explained at Renewable Heat New York. There's all kinds of program requirements. You're going to have to get somebody who's an approved contractor. So all the equipment needs to be on NYSERDA's approved appliance list, which is available at Renewable Heat New York, and it has to be installed by an approved contractor. So that is a limitation. You can't install these yourself. And again, all that information is at Renewable Heat New York. Federal incentive is available, but it's pretty insignificant. It's quite small. It's really meant for wood stoves, but it's $300 tax credit. It's not any kind of percentage, but the stoves themselves have to be at least 75% efficient. And this goes, these are retroactive. So if you purchased a good new EPA certified wood stove in 2018, 19, or 20, or a wood boiler that's on the list, then you can retroactively claim the $300 tax credit. And you want to look for that EPA stove database for the qualifying stoves. And there's an IRS form you file with your taxes to get that credit. And that is due to expire at the end of this year. So act quickly for that $300. And I'll return it back to Katie and Nick.
Thank you, Guillermo. The list of the EPA wood stoves, is that the same as the list for the NYSERDA? Do they overlap?
They do overlap, and they don't use the same lists necessarily. So, but there is a lot of overlap.
So just double check when you're looking at
Yeah.
potential stoves. Awesome. Thank you for that presentation.
And especially check the NYSERDA list. Sure. Thank you.
And so coming up next, we have renewable heating and cooling with air source and ground source heat pumps. We will have Fourth Coast joining us for that presentation. The week after that, we have potentially residential solar. We'll let you know and update you next week on any changes that might happen in the next few weeks. After that, we'll talk about community solar and then community hydro. And the community hydro will be with Northern Power and Light. Emmett Smith will be joining us. So again, just as a reminder, we are your community energy advisors. Katie covers Jefferson and Lewis counties and is at CCE of Jefferson County. Jen Perry covers Clinton, Essex, and Hamilton counties and is at Adirondack North Country Association. And I cover St. Lawrence and Franklin counties out of Cornell Cooperative Extension of St. Lawrence County. And thank you for joining us for this week's Pathways to Energy Efficiency. We look forward to seeing you again next week.